Here are some of the items you might need for the altered book project. With the altered book, there's a lot of different things that you can do, and I know, as I mentioned, getting over the fear of actually cutting or tearing into this is something that you're just going to have to deal with. I did try to select a book that you could try to respond to in some way. Mine happens to be More Lives Than One by Joseph Wood Crutch. You can see this one's already been manipulated a little bit, but I just wanted to go through some different techniques and how we might go about this. One thing is you can just tear pages out and have a rough edge, and thinking about that. If you want to be a little more systematic about it, you can line up your ruler and support it. Now I would use your less dominant hand to hold down the ruler, and then you can tear it down for more control. This was highlighted in the Buzz Spector books that we looked at, so you can think about how these pages are going to appear as they overlap. Other aspects that are super easy to do is thinking about folding. You can use your hand, you can also use your bone folder. And by doing this, it does double up the thickness of each page spread, so it does get a little bit heavier. Obviously, you can do more ornate folding. You can see that once this is together, it's going to start to change the form of the book. If you want to remove some sections, as was done at the beginning of this, what I highly suggest doing is trying to stabilize this in some way. If you have clamps handy, great. If not, you just may have to be a little more systematic in terms of how you cut this. If you're just releasing certain sections, you could always put a piece of protective cardboard underneath, or you can just carefully cut out those sections. Clearly you could measure this as well, and you'll notice that it's going to cut through a couple pieces at a time, but you could also use where you've cut previously as a guide. Now, in cutting through a text block like this, you can only go as deep as your blade will allow you to. So you think you've got about, I don't know, about a ½ inch or 3/4 of an inch that you could go down deep. So what you would have to do if you wanted to go super deep is that you may have to do it in a section and then move this. Now the thing you want to be mindful of is that when I tee this or move this over, you can see that it causes the foredge to just stair step. So you still want to make sure that it's stabilized in some way, and you could continue cutting. I wasn't able to put this in your kit, but this is a heavier utility knife. So thinking about cutting through heavier board, this is easy to come by if you don't have one, but it will allow you to make some more strategic cuts. So if I'm trying to go through this board, even though my blade is nice and sharp, I may have to go across this 5 to 7 times to ensure that I'm going to get through the entire board. I also want to make sure, oops, I didn't mean to cut through there. You may want to put something protective underneath. Now I can actually just use the width of this. I do have a handy one that is 1 inch wide, so I may just line that up. And then I can always line this up again too. And I'm not really measuring, this is a 1 inch strip piece of metal. And this is just for demo purposes. But you always want to make sure that your less dominant hand is away from the cutting edge. It looks like it's cut through most of it. I may have to go at this a few more times from the corners out. And there we go. Obviously, straight cuts are a lot easier to do than the curved ones, but you could always get a loose piece of sandpaper and sand this down. Or if you had access to a drill, you could also utilize your awl to create holes. And this will go through the cover pretty darn easily. This is pretty sharp. But a drill would actually remove the material. Some other things to think about as you're exploring your options with your book is that you could just release this from the cover itself by simply taking your X-Acto knife, your craft knife, because maybe it's the cover that you just want to use. There we go. And you can see that this exposes the spine. You can see that little bit of mole sticking out there, and that was used as reinforcement, but you could do that to basically get rid of the text block. It's another option. I've had students that have chosen to seal up edges, and so if I were to do that for this structure, I would place some wax paper in between the areas or sections that I want to glue. I could cut this a little more strategically. Once again, I would place some weights on there, but remember the PVA and the methyl cellulose will not stick to this wax paper. Then what I can do is take my adhesive while this is pressed down, and I can brush it on all surfaces, and you want to continue to weight this down with as much weight as you possibly can until it is dry. It's going to take at least a couple of hours. You may want to let it sit overnight. The weather is going to change how the adhesive dries, and it may depend on your area as well. And you would get all of those surfaces coated. If you're using just a straight methyl cellulose, it is going to dry clear again. If you're using PVA, it's always going to have a little bit of a shine to it, so it's something that you may want to think about in terms of, will this show? How do you want the viewer to look at this? A few other direct things that you can do, and it may depend on what you have available at home, is that many people will utilize a text block as it is, and they may strategically cut out different words to change and see what, to form little windows to see what's underneath. You can also, highlight areas with markers. You can also do what's called erasures, where you're basically just editing out any of the information that you don't think is important, and you can change the flow of the words from there. Clearly, we can also add a number of different items in there. If you were creating an open box area, you could add a three-dimensional item. You could also resurface areas, or let's say it's the text block you wanted to hold on to, but you're creating a new cover. It is the same process of that we went through for the flat back journal in order, and you can actually just base the measurements off the book that was, the cover, I'm sorry, that was previously on this, to make your life a little bit simpler. But hopefully this will help you get started. I'm going to be touching base with each of you on this project and make sure that you're feeling good about the resources that you have available.